This is everything you need to know for the first expansion of EverQuest, the Ruins of Kunark, one of the best expansions ever put out. There'll be timestamps so you can skip around as needed. So Chapter 1, what changes from Classic to Kunark? The level cap goes from 50 to 60. A new race is added called the Ixar, along with their home continent of Kunark. That is accessed by the Butcher Block docks for good races and the South Row barge for evil races. What you need to know about Ixar is that they have some of the best racial bonuses ever. They get enhanced hit point regen, which arguably makes them the best race for necromancers and shaman who trade health for mana. It makes them a favorite for leveling up a monk solo. They have an innate armor class boost because of their scales. Their continent is full service from level 1 to 60, and they have a high swimming skill out the gate. Cons: Ixar were not supposed to be able to wear plate. It's a ding against tanks that are Ixar because you want the highest armor class possible, but that restriction goes away next expansion. But the biggest con of Ixar is that they are hated by everyone. There is no city other than their own that they're welcome in, which makes it very difficult to bank, sell, or group in old world zones. However, like the plate restriction, it won't matter in 1 to 2 expansions, so don't let these cons scare you.
Chapter 2. What new abilities do classes get? With the level cap increase comes new spells, some being bought and others only received as mob drops. Most melee get another class of abilities too called disciplines, which you can buy. Unlike vanilla, I'm not going to touch all classes except for the most important changes. Tanks. Warriors get the defensive discipline at 55. This is the ability line that makes them the de facto raid tank for the rest of the game. Defensive reduces the amount of damage they take by 45%. Huge! Only temporarily though. Defensive makes warriors the easiest tank to heal while fighting the hardest hitting raid mobs. No other tank comes close. The only other major change is that paladins get 90% res healers. Clerics get the highest res in the game of 96%, and a death save buff. It's used on raids as a chance to save your tank if they accidentally die from bad luck. Shamans get an unresistible resist debuff, important for raids, and they get the second most powerful healing spell in the game, Torpor. It costs so little mana for how much it heals. With Shaman's great mana regen and a slowed mob, they're arguably become the best healer, except for that they can't res if someone dies. Caster DPS. Magicians get the ability summon an item that converts hit points to mana. Anyone can use it. Like shamans, mages also get the unresistible resistance debuff that's needed for raids. The biggest change of all, mages can now summon anyone in their group to them from any part of the zone. This is valuable for skipping hours of clearing trash mobs that slow down raids. To say that you're deep in the dungeon and you need to safely replace someone who's leaving. Necromancers get a better res than Pellies at 93%, but it has a cost unlike Cleric or Paladin. It requires someone to have died and sacrificed their experience, not free. Lastly, they can transfer their own mana to someone else, called twitching. Melee DPS. Monks get a bunch of new disciplines that'll help them pump out more damage quickly. Same as with rogues. And crowd control, there's no huge change for bards or enchanters.
Alright, so what quests are worth doing in Kunark? All the Ixars have a respective quest line for their class that rewards some incredible items. Even non-Ixars can do them too, like the Green Mist Sword for Shadow Knights. That's an incredible one-hander, very useful for raiding in Luckland 2 expansions later. But the best item, I think, is for Necromancers, the Demi-Lich Skull Cap. We're going to talk about epic weapons soon, but this is the real epic for Necros. It's an infinite charge life tap dot that costs 0 mana. Completely negates any life drain from their mana regen buff. Amazing. Now, quests that everyone will want to do, though, the Worker Sledge Mallet, it's very simple. You just turn in a jade, like a 7 plat gem, into the skeleton in the over there. The only issue is faction. If you can charm the guy, it's done. For classes that can't charm, they'll use a clicky called Puppet Strings that drops off of Kazakh Thule. The Worker's Sledge Mallet is a proccable port to the over there boats that everybody can use. It's a quick way to get to Kunark wherever you may be. And it's a way for melee classes that traditionally have had no port. It's a way to get out of one-way dungeons. Now for epic quests. Every class has an extensive quest line to get a signature weapon/item. I'll briefly go over them all. In short, all of them are the best item to use for Kunark. Some are used for a long time, others are replaced in the very next expansion. The Warrior Epic has an aggro proc that'll help them hold threat on a mob. It's a must-have, critical for them to do their job, but it's replaced in one expansion. The Paladin and Shadow Knight epics are a two-hander that let them bash without a shield and has a minor damage proc as well. It's only best if you're trying to DPS, but if you're trying to tank, you want to have a shield on because it makes you beefier. These two epics are made obsolete quickly. The Ranger epic is 2 swords. The offhand is a worn 40% haste buff, and the primary is a 50% slow proc. Both swords are good for a long time. Rangers really need a haste item to boost their DPS, and they need a strong slow if they hope to tank. The Cleric epic is the most valuable epic in the entire game. It's a mana-free 96% res click. Before this, it takes forever to recover from a wipe because it costs a lot of mana to cast the best res on everybody. It's always useful. The Shaman, Druid, and Necromancer epics can cast a mana-free dot, but it takes a long time to cast, too long in most cases to be useful, even in Era. They quickly become obsolete. The Mage Epic is a weapon that can summon the best pet in game, and this epic pet is not fully replaced until Plains of Power, 3 expansions later. The Wizard Epic is a buff that can absorb some damage and it boosts your mana regen a slight amount. The buff is replaced in Plains of Power 3 expansions later. The Monk Epic is unusual because it goes in your hand slot. It's not a weapon per se. It's a 40% haste clicky. It's the best in slot item that makes your bare fists the best DPS in game. It's really nice to have for a long time. The Rogue Epic is the easiest one to do. It's a worn 40% haste. Rogues were terrible in Classic because they had no good weapons, but this weapon finally gets rogues up to par with other DPS. It gets replaced next expansion though. The Enchanter Epic is a mana-free haste clicky that you can use on even level 1s. It's nice for when raids need everyone hasted. Hasting costs a lot of mana. The clicky gets replaced though in Plains of Power. Now the Bard Epic. It's probably the best one after Cleric. It's a sword that acts as all instruments simultaneously, so it boosts all their songs, and it can proc a short 55% haste buff for the group. Big for melee DPS, helps them pump out more damage. It gets replaced in Plains of Power when gear starts to have instrument mods, but it takes several pieces of gear to replace this one weapon.
What zone should you level in? If you're soloing, I'd again stick to outdoor zones. The beauty of this expansion is it's a lot more open than most. But again, grouping experience is always faster. One important thing to note is that mobs in this expansion hit harder and have more hit points than Old World ones. It is easier to solo and group in Old World, but the trade-off is the loot is better in Kunark. The most popular route will be Field of Bone from 1 to about 10ish, then moving to Kern's Tower. Kern's will get you to mid-teens. People then usually go to Warslick Woods to either kill goblins, or at the Giant Fort to high teens, low 20s. You can also hit up Lake of Ill-Omen for high teens and low 20s to go a bit further. A popular camp is the Sarnak Fort. Next spot would be the Over There from mid to late 20s to low 30s. The Frontier Mountains side of the zone has lower level trash. You could also hit up the Dreadlands for low 30s to 40s. Just pull to the Castle Foundation. Now for dungeons all the rest of the way. City of Mist has several great camps from mid 30s to mid 40s. Or if you still want to be outside, you can go back to the Over There. You hang out on the wall near Skyfire Mountain Zone In, and just be careful at night because the high-level Evil Alliance guards patrol through. Next would be Karnor's Castle from mid 40s to early 50s. Several good camps from there too. After that is Sebelis, which you can do from 50 to max, but Chardok's better for late 50s to max. There are some zones that have requirements to enter, however. We'll touch on that in a bit. One last Easter egg I want to share is the Timorous Deep fire pots. In the far southwest portion of the zone is a special room. You can click on these fire pots to instantly teleport to most major cities in the game. Very valuable for non-porter classes. I think you can even bind there on casters. One word of caution, though, is that there is a raid mob that protects the fire pots. It's usually kept down in era, but will kill you fast if you cross it alone.
Chapter 5, How to Access Restricted Zones. This is the most important part of the video. There are 3 zones locked behind a key quest, and one of them is mandatory to do. Sebelis is not optional. Fortunately, it is the easiest to get. You go to Trakenon's Teeth and you kill 1 Froglock Forager and 1 Froglock Hunter. They are tough mobs, but definitely soloable if you got a few levels on them. And they are always up and they always drop a medallion every time. Get a medallion from both. Turn-in mob is fortunately in the same zone, just far south side. Bam, you have access to Sebelis now. It is one of the best 50s grouping zones, and every guild rates it every week. It's a must-have key. The second key is for Howling Stones, also known as Cherisis. Completely optional. Like the Seb key, it only requires 2 items to finish, but unlike the Seb key, the quest mobs aren't always up. You need a spear that comes from Chancellor Zok in the Sarnak Fort of Lake Il Omen. This isn't too bad because any of the Sarnak can be a placeholder on the TLPs. The worst part is Zalgaz. You have to go to the bottom of Case Sora, which is a difficult zone. And then Zalgaz, he's a semi-rare spawn on a long respawn timer. It might take a while, but you'll eventually get a Fang from him. I think 2 drop at a time, fortunately. This tends to be the bottleneck. You turn in the spear and the Fang from Zalgaz into this Froglock, and then done. Howling Stones is exclusively a grouping zone, and you might need it for some niche quests. I really like the place because it's a quick run to get to, and the key keeps a lot of the riffraff out. If you are a class with undead nukes or you can charm undead mobs, you can destroy here. Just make sure you don't die down here because the key quest makes getting a res prohibitive. You also get attacked on zone in too. Now the last key is semi-optional, the Vishan's Peak key, the end raid zone of the expansion, and the most difficult key to obtain. Every guild I've been a part of didn't require you to do this. It was just an optional off-night raid, but if you are in a top raid guild, it will be required. I'm not going to go into depth how to get it because there's a lot of steps, but it has been made easier over time. But it's still the most difficult key to obtain out of all these ones. But the best gear of the expansion drops in Vishan's Peak. That's your reward. Chapter 6, How to Get Geared. Most people in Kunark are still going to rock planar gear from Classic. There's nothing that fully replaces planar gear yet, but all your non-visible slots will definitely be replaced. Your neck, your earrings, your rings. There is some stuff to keep an eye out for though. All the plate and chain classes have these special armor pieces that drop in grouping zones and some off of raid mobs. All these armor pieces have clickies that are infinite charges, and they cost no mana, and I'll talk about some of the best ones. The Cleric Chest is a complete heal on a 30-second cast. Amazing item. The Druid and Ranger Helm is a mana-free invis. The gloves are a mana-free snare, which is really valuable if you're a ranger that's tanking. This is your aggro grip. And the wrists for Ranger give you infinite summoned arrows. The Paladin Bracer is a stun, their number 1 aggro spell, and mana-free. The tank classes want these specific items because mana is very limited on tanks. You never sit down, so it's hard to hold threat without your main aggro spells. The SK gloves are Engulfing Darkness, their aggro spell. The legs have a Feign Death clicky that's really nice. The Shaman Bracer is a solid nuke. And lastly, the Warrior wrists are a shrink, and the legs are a self-invis. Invis is a really nice item for a class that has no spells. It's hard to get around. Let's talk about some other items that are crazy powerful. Trakenon drops the Mana Robe that DPS casters can use. It directly converts hit points to mana. SKs and Necros will want a circlet of shadow. Pay special attention to the S at the end. You want shadow and not shadows, which is the post-nerf version. So kind of like the Dark Elf Mask of Classic. For a limited time, there's a version of this item that's an instant cast invis, and then later on it gets nerfed to have a small casting time. You want the pre-nerf version. Enchanters and bards will want to get their hands on a Goblin Gazugi Ring. It's one of the only instant cast Charmbreaker items available to them. And now probably the two most iconic and OP Twink items ever in EQ. The Myconid Spore King and Deep Sebulus drops the Fungi Tunic that has a crazy hit point regen buff on it. It is the best Twink item ever to give to a melee leveling up, especially if you throw it on an Ixar that also has hit point regen. It makes them unkillable for a long time. The other item is another one that's limited time before it gets nerfed, the Fungi Staff. So it's a clicky hit point regen buff that every class can use. Great for Necros and Shamans that can trade their hit points for mana. So pre-nerf, everybody can use it. Post-nerf, only Druids and Shaman can use it. So that's all for the items. Chapter 7, what you need to know about raiding. Low barriers to entry, except being, I think, at minimum level 55. Most guilds will tolerate that, but get to 60. It's not as hard as original EQ with the experience taking forever. These TLP servers are so quick, and then you have pay to win with experience pots. The only other requirement would be having your Sebulus key. Very easy to do, like I said. And the reason why you need the Sebulus key is you're going to raid it every week. You need to kill the end boss of Sebulus to get a drop to make the VP key, the end raid zone key. It's not a deal breaker if you don't have the VP key when you enter a guild. You need help to get it. Now, gear-wise, it's not really required, but you're going to want to buy crafted resist jewelry so you take less damage from AoEs. Like, all the dragons have nasty AoEs that just destroy your hit points. Resist gear helps you survive better. You'll still want this even for the next expansion. Just get resist gear. You'll want an instant clicky buff item, say like J-Boots. You want to keep a junk buff up because many of the raid mobs dispel. And it'll protect your important buffs, your hit point, your mana regen, all that. That'll keep those from getting stripped off you. Beyond that, there's really nothing else you need to worry about. You'll need your guild's help to get your epic. That's really the ultimate goal of Kunark. Thank you so much to our special guests, Varietyvoid and Daemodeus. I'm going to give a link to Varietyvoid. Daemodeus doesn't have one. Varietyvoid, he streams on Twitch. Really good stuff. Very interactive with the community. So I wish you guys best of luck, good hunting, and Kunark.